Welcome to Mindrolling, our new podcast, and I'm Raghu Marcus.
I'm David Silver, accompanying Raghu, and we have a very special guest today.
Yes, Duncan Trussell.
Hello.
Hi, Duncan.
Hi, Duncan.
Hi, guys.
Duncan, we're going to have to, have a long laundry list of what Duncan does. And but really, there's only one word, as far as we're concerned, and that's he's our guru.
Guru.
Guruji.
All great gurus laugh. They all laugh when you call
in
them.
trouble.
Well, that's been proven. But you are our guru, so don't deny it.
We would not be doing this without you.
Be nowhere.
Nothing.
I believe that the doesn't Ram Dass say the teacher points the way and the guru is the way. So in this situation, I'm definitely more teacher than guru.
Well, it's all, one word over another. We're going to call you guru, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it. But isn't that a funny word? That word it's such a charge. That's a word nobody understands, but it's got such charge to it that it really is a magical word.
Well, Ram Dass wrote a book about it a year ago to say this is what a guru really is, and it's called Be Loved Now. By the way, we need to, Duncan, we have a sponsor now.
Oh, congratulations. Who's the sponsor?
Audible.com.
Oh, yeah, great. Congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, Audible.com is the primo audiobook company in the world, maybe the solar system. And they're offering, if you take a 30-day free trial, you get a free book. I don't know whether the book is, like a little tiny book about fishing or War and Peace. But whatever you want, you get it. And we think that's great. And we love the fact that they're doing this because it makes sense. We're Audible, we're audio, we're .com. So,
and you can get the Brothers Karamazov if you want to spend the rest of your life listening to dreary Russian existentialism.
Yes.
It's like 200 hours of a book.
I did it.
Really?
And before we tell people who you really are, I want to say that James Joyce once was at a dinner party in Dublin, and somebody said to him, James, I can't spend my life reading Finnegan's Wake. It'll take me my whole 70 years. And he said, so? It's the end of the story, but it's not screamingly funny, but, it's true. It happens to be true.
That book's amazing. I have not read that entire book, but because Terence McKenna is such a disciple of that book, I
really?
picked it up and read some of it, and it is astoundingly difficult to understand, but really beautiful. I guess you kind of just have to let go to the idea that you have to accept that you're not going to understand what it is, maybe.
Well, we have to say who you is about right now, and maybe a little bit of a backstory. But Duncan lives in Los Angeles and travels the nation, doing stand-up comedy, as well as he has a dynamite podcast, Duncan Trussell. What's the name of it?
It's called the Duncan Trussell Family Hour.
The Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And there's some stuff in there that's not so family-oriented, but it's really funny.
It depends on your definition of family. It's more Jim Jones style family.
Yeah, right. Yes, exactly.
Traditional family.
So Duncan and I met through this gentleman named Ram Dass, who those of you who have heard Duncan's podcast, of which there'll probably be a few of you by the time this hits the airwaves, it was love at first sight, right?
Oh man, you blew my mind. One really cool thing about you, and one really cool thing about Ram Dass is that you don't look. Your mind constructs ideas of how like a very spiritual person or an advanced person or a higher vibrational frequency person should look and should behave, and this is like this is idolatry, and one of the most limiting things I think a person can do. And the great teachers are the ones who just shatter that idea that there's some specific way of being, because this is something you told me once, which I'll remember for the rest of my life, which is it's what's in between the lines. You know, what's coming out when someone's done a great deal of spiritual work. They could probably be talking about the phone book, and the stuff coming out of them is still going to be this fascinating, powerful, beautiful energy. When you left my apartment, I had not smoked marijuana, but I was, God, I am so stoned right now. I'm just baked. I'm baked. Why did I get so high? Did I eat pot? And then I realized, oh man, I just got vibed out by you.
No.
You really put the juice in me, and it lasted for a while. Not scary high either, but a kind of delightful, wonderful feeling.
Anyhow,
so yeah, love at first sight. I'll call it that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right, and that's all. That's the common denominator. So anyhow, we obviously really hit it off, and Duncan just turned us on because I am involved, and so is David, in the Love Serve Remember Foundation that Ram Dass started, and just putting stuff out, media to the digital media and so on. It allows him to continue teaching. We'll talk about more of that later or in another day. But that certainly was the bonding feature that we had together, and you have to say, you invited me out, and we in Los Angeles when I was out there, and said, come do a podcast.
Yes.
And one of the interesting things about that, sorry to go on like this, Dave.
Go on. I'm very fascinated.
You are?
Yes, I am.
You've probably heard this story about 3 million times.
No, I just heard Duncan, and you together on the podcast.
Well, we did this thing, and Duncan talked to me about whatever it was that turned. It's really the formative nature of what made this podcast came from there, because we were doing he was talking about what those transformers were, what were the things that really made the change for us, and how do we get there, and so on and so forth. So that was something that basically from that jump was, gee, and it was all Duncan. It was you just saying, hey, why don't you go out and do something? And remember, I said, yeah, I got a friend. We could, we certainly could get into some nice conversations about this stuff.
Yeah.
So really, that was the genesis of it, and going on your show and so on. And what it takes me back to is when I first personally met Ram Dass. Of course, I told you this. I met him in Montreal. I was the program director of a major rock and roll station, and they said, hey, we want you to advertise that Ram Dass is giving a lecture at McGill, and then bang, what's that? What's a Ram Dass? And Tim Leary and Richard Alpert, of course. And I said, well, I love those people. They sent me a tape, and the rest is history. We just started broadcasting Ram Dass, and I went to meet him, and, it was just this magnetism. So what we did together, 40-odd years later, was full circle. And that is a bunch of what we're trying to do with Mindrolling, by the way. It's talk about the full circle nature of what we went through in late 60s, early 70s, and that transformation and what's happening now. And this is due to you telling me that there's, of course we see it. People come to Ram Dass from their 20s and 30s, a lot more these days. But there is parallels. And speak to that, would you, Duncan?
Sure. Well, it's a kind. If you getting into causality is delightful, especially when it's like positive causalities. It's really fun to map it out, and it's very human to try to map it out. It's really interesting. So if you consider it, where it gets really strange is that, it ultimately all ties back to Neem Karoli Baba, because his information, this man in a blanket started giving information to Alpert, to Ram Dass, and then he was able to articulate that information in a really easily digestible way for a lot of people. And then so that information spread into society via all his books and lectures, and that influenced other people who, wrote their own versions of it. And there's a lot of other examples besides Ram Dass, Krishna Das, all the various people who came in contact with that man and indirectly came in contact with that man. I've heard Steve Jobs had Be Here Now by his bed when he was dying. I don't know how true that is, but
That's true. That's
that
true.
floats out there in the air.
Yeah.
So in that way, you've got this anonymous man living in a valley, just talking about love, or it's, I know that's a reduction of it, but it's much bigger than that. And that creates this strange type of spiritual nuclear explosion that gets, blasted through people. And it ends up with me years ago when I'm in college on acid, reading Be Here Now in my dorm room and seeing a picture of Neem Karoli Baba and immediately thinking like, man, I feel like I know that guy. I just kept thinking, that guy reminds me of I definitely run into that guy before. And then of course, over the next many, many years, always coming back to Grist for the Mill or Be Here Now and really listening to that philosophy and as you get older, it goes from being a kind of recreational activity to being like a medicine. Like when you're young, it's like, this is groovy, man, the astral plane. And then when you start getting older, you're like, I'm definitely going to die. I'm definitely going to die.
That's so true.
And then it starts becoming more of like, you really want to start getting into it deeper. And so then that's when I thought, okay, I'm going to contact Ram Dass's foundation and see if I can help them in some way do some kind of service, because that's always some advice people give is like, start doing some service, doing service work. There's a name for it and I can't remember what that is.
Seva.
But so that's when I contacted you guys. And then the end result of that is that we're sitting here talking and a podcast has happened where the nuclear explosion continues in the form of this strange electronic medium that's now carrying the exact same stuff that was carried around, and I guess the medium that was floating in Alpert's head.
Yeah, but
brain,
his final instructions that Ram Dass got the day that he left the foothills of the Himalayas where he met this being, Neem Karoli Baba, he was going back to America. And Maharaji, which is what we called him, said to Ram Dass, now, don't tell anybody about me. Nobody. Don't say a word. That was his instructions. It wasn't do yoga or anything. It was, and what happened was the exact opposite. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
The exact opposite. Anyhow, so back to this is how we met and a little bit of his backstory and so on. And I'd like to let me jump to. I mean, you're a master at this. You are the guruji of these podcasts. But can you tell a little bit about how did you come into it? And I know you had a mentor, and people would be interested to hear just how some of this stuff works. And folks, what Duncan mixes into this podcast is a tremendous brew of entertainment and consciousness. I mean, it is really something. And so talk to me a little about it.
Well, what it is, it's as a comedian, it's funny. Stand-up comedy is kind of like a haiku. It's a bit of a limited form in communicating ideas, which is why a lot of comedians like fantasize about the idea of like being rock stars, because rock stars can stand on stage and sing sad stuff or sing romantic stuff or kind of hit other areas that a comedian you can't quite hit without seeming indulgent or preachy or just on stage you really have to. There's a real specific rhythm to stand up.
Yeah.
And so podcasts create this cool way to incorporate all the stuff you learn from doing stand-up comedy, which is just this, there's a rhythm and almost a math to comedy. It allows you to like use all that stuff you learn, but then it gives you more of it lets you relax more into like deeper ideas. And it doesn't always have to end on a punchline, which is a real freeing feeling for a comic. And then the other amazing thing about podcasts as we're calling them now. I'm sure that name's going to change eventually because it's a name based on only one type of technology that you can listen to them on. You can listen to them on anything now. They're in, Apple TV. They're on not Netflix, but on Xboxes. You can listen to them. They're in some cars. It's built into dial-up podcasts at this point, I think.
Really?
So anyway, up until a very short time ago, the ability to get information out into the world was limited to your access to the distribution mechanism. And that distribution mechanism up until a very short time ago has always been controlled by capitalists generally. I mean, from time to time, obviously there's like activists who've had printing presses and stuff, but in the extreme, generally the reason people want to distribute information and ideas has embedded within it an idea of like making some profit from that. I'm not saying that's terrible or whatever, but what that means is that ideas that might not be palatable to a large group of people are not going to be the ideas picked by the people running distribution mechanisms to send out into the world. Because what's the point? So what that means is if you want to, as a comedian, if you're a little on the weird side, you're not going to make it onto Conan O'Brien. You're not going to get on Jay Leno necessarily. And that was used to be, as a comedian, that was the only way to get out to people, to get a following or to get people to come see you at clubs. And and also when you went and got on TV, maximum 5 minutes, 6 minutes, maybe recently, you'd get your Comedy Central half hour and an hour, but it's still this half hour that's been censored by a group of people. I went to New York with a friend of mine who did a Comedy Central half hour special. And one of the most bizarre moments was when I walked into this room where she was sitting with a group of executives who had her act listed on a sheet. And these people were the most miserable looking people you've ever seen in your life. They were just so serious, and they're in formal business wear, like suits, like Wall Street suits, looking at her set list and going through it word by word, trying to change certain words that they thought would offend people or wouldn't make it through standards and practices. So just think about that filter of fear, that filter of censorship is what that kind of art goes through before it makes it onto TV. And then the art, of course, is interrupted by commercials selling pharmaceuticals and cars. And then also the person that you're seeing perform is not in a moment that you're going to see them at a comedy club. They're terrified. This might be one of the biggest moments of their life. And if they fail, oh man, it's the worst. So also, the other weird thing about that medium of getting comedy out into the world is that before those shows start, a guy comes out and he says, if you think this is funny, laugh. If you think it's not funny, laugh harder. So what that does is it throws the comedian's timing into this very weird place where you come out on stage and the people start laughing at your setup instead of your punchline because they've just been told that they've got to laugh at everything.
So that's nice and bizarre.
It's bizarre, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me one thing, though. So when you started doing these things, was it strictly, the material strictly just from the stand-up act or ideas that were around, comedic ideas and so on? Did consciousness slip in, later? What happened there?
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, I think probably from the very beginning, the spiritual stuff always came out because that's where my mind is just always rolling around those ideas constantly. My mind, I didn't mean to say the name of your show. My mind's always spinning around those ideas. So, it naturally comes out. It naturally came out. It wasn't like I thought to myself, this podcast is going to be for this one thing. It was more like... it was I was living with my girlfriend. We're both comedians. We knew that we'd done a podcast. That's what happened. We went to someone's house and did a podcast with them, and it was a blast. Right. And after we did the podcast, a lot of people responded to it in a real positive way, and that encouraged us to want to do our own podcast. And so we just started doing it because it was fun. Right. I mean, it's a form of self-expression that's just a blast.
Well, we've been doing some of these now, as you know. We've just it's a pretty brand new thing. We're just starting out, and it has been fun sharing, and we've had guests on like you at this point, and I think someone has been very, very quiet here. This man generally is.
I talk all the time. But
Actually, this is a record. It's a miracle. You haven't said a word in, I don't know, how long we've been on here? 15, 20 minutes?
Well, without sounding too bromancy, I'm fascinated by what Duncan's saying, because a couple of things, Duncan, that I wanted to say. I've always said that, maybe falsely, and the 60s were 50 years ahead of their time, and we haven't yet caught up with that. And one of the things that happened in the 60s that people don't talk about much, I came to America in 1966 from England, and the first couple of things that blew my mind were American rock bands that I didn't know in England, and Richard Pryor.
Oh, wow.
Now, Richard Pryor was frequently on Johnny Carson's show, and it was the most surreal thing, because, or Ed Sullivan, surrounded by jugglers, and Freddie and the Dreamers at best. And what struck me about Richard Pryor was that he was a whole new level of comedy. I won't use the word spiritual or dimensional, but there was a dimension to Pryor that changed everything, and Carlin too, and then later Robin Williams. When you talk about the freedom given to you by this new sort of democratized distribution systems, it's marvelous, and I'll tell you why, in my opinion. When Richard Pryor really became big, when Robin Williams really became big, when the people from Saturday Night Live really became big, Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, all these people. The system pushed them into movies and into sitcoms. And I hope none of them are listening, but it deteriorated. The kind of freedom that you saw even on the Carson show with Pryor and those guys was very rarely exhibited in feature movies or sitcoms. I watched Mork and Mindy. It made me smile. Robin Williams made me fall on the floor. Richard Pryor killed me with his rebellious, completely fourth-dimensional humor and his attitude and his timing. But once the system ate them up and people realized they were popular and people liked them, they immediately became movie stars or TV stars, and it went down. I'd never seen anything as great as Robin Williams' Shakespeare rap, his one-hour Shakespeare rap, which was one of the first shows on HBO in 1984 or 83, round about that. I don't know if you've seen it, Duncan.
I haven't seen it.
It's astonishing.
I did see Carlin perform at the Comedy Store, and it was mind-blowing.
Similar thing, stream of consciousness. And even though they weren't doing exactly what your particular amalgam is, what I've heard of it, which is new, and ancient too, because we don't know whether, Aristotle was funny too, and Socrates was funny too. We don't know any of that stuff. We do know that
you know what? I bet they're pretty funny based on Socrates. The Apology of Socrates is a pretty funny thing. If you read that, it's hilarious. Well, when he decided to drink the poison, and he said, if I drink this and there's nothing after this, and it's like the deepest, best part of sleep, then you've done the greatest favor anyone's ever done to me. So thanks. Yeah, if I don't die and there is this and it continues on, I'm just going to keep doing exactly what I'm doing here. So, you lose no matter what. That's brilliant. I love that. That was an incredible way to really transcend the paradigm that they were trying to force him into. And I think that's what really great stand-up comedy does, is it accurately analyzes a particular part of the zeitgeist, or the particular ridiculous, whatever the ridiculous paradigm happens to be being adhered to by the most amount of people in society. Whenever a comedian comes onto the scene, they're able to look at that and realize the absurdity of it, and then kind of talk about that in ways that make people laugh. And the reason it makes people laugh is because it's this energy release as they come in contact with the truth.
Well, Ram Dass was very, very funny from the get-go. When I first saw him talk, I was astonished because he got through every which way possible. And one of the most profound ways was by making us scream with laughter at his own self-inquiry. When he started talking about some of the erring ways that he would admit to that we all have and have,
yes,
that broke the glass. There was nothing between us and him. Of course, he was an amazing performer. His timing was great. you know. But that humor, that comedy, that perspective was one of the things that magnetized me to him immediately, because I knew he wasn't pompous and he wasn't full of crap. And,
Well, it's that form of exorcism that I love, that form of shame exorcism. And I think Ram Dass does that. And that's one thing that I really love about him, is that he is so good at getting you past the thing where you feel guilty about whatever the thing is that you think so terrible that you're doing, because everybody's got something that they think is just the worst thing anyone on earth has ever done. And you know, the biggest experience I ever had with that is I was really depressed in college, and I did something that you generally I don't think you should do if you're depressed, but I did it anyways. I chomped a bunch of mushrooms and went wandering out into this field in my school, and it was just this field of flowers. And I'm depressed, man. I mean, I am depressed. Like, if someone's playing guitar and singing something nice in their dorm rooms, I'm rolling my eyes. I'm wandering through the halls of that school like some kind of ring wraith from Tolkien, just pissed and depressed. And I walk out into that field, and it was just like I just got hit with this blast of love that wasn't coming from any one place, but it was this sense of the universe saying to me, I love you, I love you, I love you, you're fine, and I love you, and you're wonderful. And there was this realization that I had at that moment where I understood that I was the one that wasn't forgiving myself. It wasn't anything in the world, it was me. I was the one that was oppressing myself and pushing my head into the mud and rolling my eyes at myself. And, you know, there was a big relief that happened then, and it didn't last. You know, I went back to, and I still do from time to time, go into the place of being really hard on myself. But I think that's something that great comedians and great teachers like Ram Dass do, is they make you understand that you're absolutely forgiven.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, people say, Duncan, that, you know, the ego is the center of narcissism and self-absorption. But you could say that feeling unworthy and depressed about yourself is the center of narcissism.
Absolutely.
You know, because you're then thinking that the world is dark and you're dark within it. And you're the darkest imaginable. As you said before, when Ram Dass would talk about his innards, his psychological innards, you know, it was a great relief, wasn't it? You sat in that audience, you listened to the tape, whatever it was. And great comedians do this too. I mean, Bill Hicks, you know, who was one of my idols.
Yes.
You know, he did that. And when I saw him live once, many, many, many years ago, I came out of it with not such a different feeling from Ram Dass or other great teachers, that, you know, okay, I'm not such a horrible, guilty swine.
Yes.
You know, and that's just what I'm just repeating what you said. I'm interested, Duncan, if you allow me for a minute to ask you some deconstructing things. It sometimes is problematic, but when you perform, when you do things, is it stream of consciousness? Do you have a bunch of notes? Do you have a skeletal idea of what you're going to say, or do you just let it fly? Well, how do you do it?
Bill Hicks has a great quote where Bill Hicks says, your jokes are safety parachutes for when your improv isn't working. So it's like you have I do have a set. I mean, I do have jokes that you have to. Yeah, God, I would so love to not be chained to the material. And there are moments where you transcend the material and you're just in the moment and talking. But you do slide back into jokes, because jokes are they grow. You know, they're like plants. So you'll come up with like an initial idea, and then that idea, when you start doing it on stage, their little tributaries will begin to develop around that idea that lead to aspects of it that you hadn't even thought. And also you'll realize where the rhythm is, and you'll realize where people are responding to it. And so over the course of doing a joke, maybe 15 times, the thing that you came up with in the beginning and the thing that it is in the end are going to be two very different things. So it's like you go on stage with a few ideas that you want to talk about, and you have aspects of those ideas that have punchlines and places where there's laughs. And it's kind of a mixture of, like, it's a weird form of linguistic peekaboo, where you seem like you're going in one direction, and then all of a sudden you'll throw something out that is completely diametrically opposed to what you're saying. But if you do that in the right way and in the right timing, that'll make people laugh. And so that's kind of the structure of it. And then within that structure, you actually try to say stuff in between those moments of peekaboo. And it's a kind of weird combination of snake charming and playing with a giant baby consisting of the number of people who are existing in that audience, and like trying to sort of do the magic tricks that go along with comedy, but then within those magic tricks, articulate the ideas that you've been thinking about and philosophies that you have that are hopefully and will be completely unique if you're being honest with yourself. Because everyone's very unique. Like everyone not very unique is unique. Everyone's unique. And that's why above the Comedy Store, when you go into the Comedy Store, there's this sign that Mitzi, the owner of the place, had painted and put up there about the open mic, where she says, for 3 minutes, because they give people 3 minutes on Sundays and Mondays to just try comedy, for 3 minutes, not to be funny, but to be yourself.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Listen, to move this into a little bit of a different direction is to talk about, or, something I've been really wanting to hear from you is we have been talking to the people that we've been talking to, and amongst our, David and I, about what reality is there to, and you and I have talked about this, the connection of the stressors that we had in the time that we got transformed, which is in our mid-20s, basically, early mid-20s, into the 30s. At that time, what was going on, there was a severe war, the Vietnam War. There was, a severe pressure, societal pressure on, being carved into a box. And that's where you had to, perform from and come from and live from and so on and so forth. And just to today, major war, it's been going on for a long time. Real stressors relative to polarization and which we had, that was going on back then, to, stressors, economic stressors and so on, although these stressors have probably been, way more than that was back then. But do you see, because you've said to me, my audience is interested in hearing about what to do, in terms of day-to-day, how to be happier, how to live, in a way that is balanced. Do you think it's true?
Do I think it's true that there's a movement of people waking up right now?
Yeah, that's similar to those that, the boomers that woke up in the late 60s and early 70s. Do you think
Yes. I think it's a little different. I think it's different. I think the 60s were, if you look at the 60s, one important facet of the 60s is the draft, which we don't have right now. So there was always the looming threat that you were going to get dragged to a jungle and have to kill people you don't know, or you go to jail.
Yeah. Right.
So
that's a stressor.
That was like a mistake that the military-industrial complex made. And the the thing about the military-industrial complex is that they learn from their mistakes, and so they're really good now at keeping us nice and distant from the war that's happening right now. There's no draft. People go to the war they say there's no draft, of course, but there is. If you're in an inner city, or you were born, if your incarnation happens to be in the wrong place, to the wrong parents, or to a challenging incarnation, and you find yourself in some inner city and you are surrounded by drug addiction, crime, anger, and you have the motivation that you want to make money, and you know that it'll pay for your education, then it's really easy to get tangled up with the military. Right. And you'll get into so it's not really a draft, but it is there is a compulsion to go there because the ROTC comes to your schools and they, really paint a pretty grim picture of your future if you don't have the help of the military to pay for your education. Those commercials, man, they're amazing. They show the commercials that they show for joining the military. They always show these people in control rooms.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? You're like in this nice air-conditioned room that looks like it's from 24, like there's nice computers and just lights, and it's really nice. They don't show you covered in your friend's entrails.
Duncan, I have to say this. What you just said is so central. It's not just an ancillary point you made there. The fact that we were petrified that we were going to end up in rice paddies in North Vietnam, shot at, murdered, or whatever, was the impetus, was the absolute thing that gained the traction, that sent people into the streets, that made John Lennon write those songs and Bob Dylan and Jerry Garcia write those songs. That was the thing. Now that college kids and upper middle class kids are not afraid of that, it is not there. The other point you made, which I don't want to sound so, sycophantic here, but the other point you made about it is still a draft, because those who exist in poverty and adversity of a kind that most of us don't ever see will see that this is the only way out without seeing the reality of what war really is. So those 2 points you made, I cannot stress enough how much I believe that was the impetus for the massive protests in Washington. I went to the one where there were 2 million people. Are you talking about Occupy Wall Street? I'm talking about Occupy Wall Street now, but the one in Washington in 1968, which I went to, which was huge beyond belief, most of the people there were draftable age. And, that was the thing that made us fight it, because it was fear. Exactly. And see, this is why I say I think that the 60s was a form of revolution, or a combination revolution renaissance that happened. And the engine of the 60s was the access to psychedelics that was initially paradoxically introduced to us through the CIA and MK Ultra and the Cold War and their attempt to try to come up with a truth serum or a way to interrogate people to grab information from them. That's a weird paradox. And also the paranoia and fear of knowing that if some number gets, if the dice roll the wrong way, then you will get taken to the jungle, or you've got to lie. The option is you have to dishonor yourself and lie to get out of going to fight, and or you just go to the jungle and you end up, killing people and dropping napalm on people. And you do this so that a small group of people can make money from war machines. And that's a kind of sad thing when you realize that a lot of people's initial interest in singing about love and peace was not wanting to get blown up or kill people. Absolutely. Rather than some kind of connection with a transcendent idea that we're supposed to be vehicles for love. That's okay. I get it. But the difference, so that's a big difference now. What people don't realize, this thing that just happened with the video that has angered the Muslims and caused them to attack embassies. Everyone's like, oh, these Muslims, Islam's supposed to be a nation of peace. How can they burn down one of our embassies that are just out there trying to steal their oil? Why would they want to burn an embassy down? To put it in perspective, according to the Associated Press, the United States over the last 10 years has murdered 110,000 Iraqis. Think about that. 110,000 people. The distance from Egypt to Baghdad is pretty much the distance from Los Angeles to Portland. So imagine, if you were in Los Angeles and the Russians had invaded Portland and Seattle and killed 110,000 people. Imagine how you would feel. You'd be a little uptight. You wouldn't drive by the Russian embassy with a big grin on your face thinking, oh, they were just trying to find weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, and they accidentally killed 110,000 of us. Point taken. You'd want them out of your country.
Yes. Hey, listen, let's switch gears again because we're
sorry about that.
We're getting to.
I didn't mean to go Weather Underground on you guys.
Yeah, right. I was going to say before though that the other way that we did get that people who were not wanting to go over to the jungles came to Canada, where I was, and we would shift them over the border. So there was another way. There was a third rail on that one, just to let you know.
I wish I'd have done that because I
You should have.
I didn't want to go through what I went through because when I
Well,
said,
you guys, you might get a chance to do it again, you guys. Not to be a doom and gloom person, but if you take a look at what's
Jeez.
happening right now, and this is why I say this stuff, and this is the stuff that I've been talking about more on stage, is because I think that we are in a crisis situation, and the crisis is a crisis of people ignoring reality for what it really is right now, and that is going to be. You can't just keep doing that.
Yeah,
you know,
but one thing to remember in all of this, to be able to properly take actions that you believe would support change, you have to come from a place of non-aggression and non-us or them. That means a lot of work on yourself before you can do these things effectively. I mean,
Yes,
that's
you're right. I mean, I know
absolutely
you're right.
has
I mean,
to
this
be
is why
kept
I
in
get
mind.
so shrill, because inside of me is just like, a lot of confusion and anger, and I know that like when you really like get focused, the way that you articulate these ideas can be a lot more digestible, and I know that if you just say the truth flat out to people, then they contract. And their defense
No, it's not
mechanisms
even that.
go
It
up.
doesn't matter what you say. It's what you vibrate, the energy you're vibrating. If you're the way that you're reaching out by whatever means, joining Move On or whatever it is, if you are not vibrating from a place of non-polarization, nothing's
Right.
going to happen. I don't care what you do. It's just doing what they're doing. It's the same thing.
Right.
So
I always forget that.
Yeah, we all forget it all the time. We forgot it in the 60s. But, the truth of the matter is, I read this thing Yoko said recently. She said that John Lennon grew so much so quickly he said that, the Vietnam War was the thing that made him write politically relevant songs. But by the end of his life, which was only 40 years old, let's face it, he was writing Give Peace a Chance and All You Need Is Love. And that's, I think, what Raghu is talking about to some extent. Maybe we have to go through a process sometimes of anger, as long as we come out of it the other end, whereby we realize that we don't want to do what they're doing, and that nothing ever good came from shooting back in a way. And when
maybe you guys can help me figure this one out. There's a letter I just read that Gandhi sent to, I can't remember who it was in the UK, regarding Hitler, and he was telling them not to fight. He said, "Let the Germans come into your house, have your stuff," because he was like an ultra pacifist, right? And if they had done that, then I don't know what kind of planet we'd be living on right now. Isn't there a place where the philosophy of pure pacifism becomes irrelevant?
It's not nothing. It's back to this. There's a Hindu text called the Bhagavad Gita, right? And
Yes.
it's about warring between families, basically. And it's about, Krishna telling his chariot driver, Arjun, who doesn't want to go and fight. He does not want to kill his relatives. And he said, you have to do what you've got to do, but you're going to do it without attachment. I mean, that's a simplification of this.
Yeah.
But it's what we're talking about. We are not talking about anything but what's inside the person. We are not talking about the actions. Okay, so
Right.
whether it's pacifism or you have to take some other, you're taking action by, being in a crowd that suddenly the police start to do, send tear gas in and, you get asphyxiated. I mean, whatever, that is part of what you need to do. Then you do it, but you're not doing it from a place of anger and attachment. You're doing it completely from a balanced place. Now, that is awfully difficult for anybody to do, but we are here to be as conscious as we can be. So when you talk about the stuff that you're talking about and the liability of all these people who've been killed and so forth, and the anger and hurt that we all have, you have to back up into a balanced place of these people. Everybody only wants, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, everybody wants to be happy ultimately. The fact that these people are awfully misguided and leading, the country into things that they, have done in the past. It's like, and Ram Dass's great example is I keep, when George W. was president, he said, I have to keep him on my altar with my gurus and with, everybody who I pay homage to, because I need to connect with the soul. There's something behind all this. I don't have to like his incarnation. So I think that's what we're talking about.
He said that George Bush unfortunately had what he called a lousy incarnation, so that we should actually, have charitable love for that, because those of us that maybe are not full of hatred and don't want to hurt indigenous peoples across the world are kind of lucky if you think about it. Because we live in a place inside of ourselves which is not a hater. If you are a hater, my goodness, how difficult it is to overcome that without some kind of epiphany or revelation. So in a sense, one has to have, compassion and some degree of forgiveness for those that are consumed by the desire to control the planet.
Yeah. There's a great blog, actually, Ram Dass just put out on ramdass.org, by the way, everybody. Certainly check out that site. And one last question, because we got to go. We got someone waiting in line. We got people waiting in line to talk to us here, Duncan.
Okay, before your question, I just want to say that you guys are so cool. This is what I love about you guys. This is what I love about Ram Dass, is that you're like, that idea of putting George Bush on your altar is so beautiful and so much smarter. Because, I can work myself into it. It's so much easier for me to work myself up into a hippie stoner froth than it is to sit and meditate for 10 minutes.
No, it's not about meditating either. Nothing like that. It's what is it about? It's about awareness. You have awareness. Yeah, right. That makes sense. If I'm not balanced, how can I have any real effect? And again, on ramdass.org is a wonderful podcast that's all about energy and what that really is. Last question, just the people that are in your audience, and you have a wonderful audience and a large, listen, didn't you do a podcast recently? It was about a few months ago, it was about what to do about unwanted hair that ended up being about Aldous Huxley. Is that is that right? So that's the insanity of this man. That's another. We'll have to talk. We could have a whole podcast about what the hell you were thinking then, but we'll wait for another time. But the audience that you have, tell us, why do you think they are interested in some of this stuff that we're talking about at this point in time, 2012?
Well, I think that that the ability to get real information has never been. We've never had so much access to real information before. So I think that the reason people are interested in listening to these kinds of conversations is the same reason that people who've been eating prison cafeteria food for a long time would love to eat a nice nutritional meal. There's been a kind of people, the way people get vitamin deficiencies. Well, people have a bit of a truth deficiency, and people love to hear information that that allows them to have tools to get outside of popular culture or the dominant paradigm, because it's like what you just said, that the interaction we just had, to me, you're like a firefighter who just like put out a small little brush fire. You know what I mean? It's really cool. Like now I'm like feel calm and like, and I'll tell you, it makes me feel very hopeful and optimistic and excited about life. This idea of a new way to approach conflict, or a new way, or I know it's an ancient way, but so I think that if you believe that the earth is alive, which I do, then I think that the earth as a living organism has wants very much, and we're all part of the earth. It wants very much for us to get past the final little bits of growing pains that seem to be happening from our transition from being proto-hominids into being what we're going to become. And I think that anybody who just opens themselves up a little bit to that, the energy of healing that I think is coming from the earth, I think that anyone who opens themselves up to that just a little bit experiences some incredible things in their life. And that feeling of connectivity that comes from these kinds of conversations happening, I don't think there's anything like it. And you're certainly not going to get it from watching Nancy Grace talk about toddlers getting murdered in the Everglades.
And
I have one more question for you, Duncan.
You do?
Yeah, I do. It's important to me. Will you please do this again with us?
Are you kidding? I would do this over almost anything. You guys are the coolest. I really mean it. You don't know how much these types of interactions with you guys means to me. I mean, really, you just can't imagine. You just have no idea how much.
The last statement about the healing energy of the earth, right? That was a wonderful, wasn't that?
Can't top that.
That is why he's Guruji to us. Absolutely. Well, we love you, Duncan.
Yeah, we do.
And
I love you too.
Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Please go, and that podcast is just fantastic. And we're Raghu Marcus and
David Silver,
and it's Mindrolling. And please do go to mindrollingpodcast.com for goodies and other stuff.
Yeah. Good night, Duncan. See you soon.
Good night, you guys. Wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Love you.